From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines. We're at the Indianapolis 500 Speedway for this special edition of U.S. Farm Report. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what we're working on for you.
Checkered flag is in the air.
These drivers run on milk and ethanol, so we'll break down both markets with two experts.
We continue to add cows, we continue to push milk, and I don't see us backing off of that.
More than just the winning driver, it's milk in winner's circle on race day.
Well, ahead in the show, we'll introduce you to the man behind the milk.
For one dairy producing family, they care about more than just their cows producing high quality milk.
We learned that we were going to have to do something different than just pay a good wage.
Meet the real faces of dairy. And in John's world,
replanting. I think it's a four-letter word.
U.S. Farm Report, brought to you by the dependable, long-lasting Chevy Silverado.
Now for the market-related news. With more rain, U.S. corn plantings falling behind again, but just by a point. The U.S. Department of Agriculture says 84% of the crop is planted, a point behind average, but that's a 13-point jump in a week. 54% is emerged, also lagging by a point. Now, soybean planting is now ahead of average, but also by just a point. 53% is planted, a 21-point jump in a week's time. 19% of the crop is emerged, that's down 2 points from normal. And cotton planting gaining pace at 52%, that's now 2 points ahead. The latest numbers not accounting for replant, and it could be one of the worst years for replanting on record. But Farm Journal agronomist Ken Ferry telling us that during his 30 years of agronomy, this is the most replant he's seen across Illinois. He says he's seen worse localized issues before, but nothing this widespread, especially for the middle two-thirds of the state. From rain to cold conditions to soil crusting over, Illinois farmers are facing it all this year. All that rain really providing relief in the latest drought monitor, with only 14% of the country seeing drought. That marks a new record low for the drought monitor. But it's not rosy everywhere. Dryness expanding a little in North and South Dakota. OPEC decided this week to extend cuts in oil production by 9 months, now to March 2018. But that news was underwhelming to investors, with oil prices taking a sharp drop Thursday, plunging 5%. The trade wanted cuts to last even longer to help the global glut of oil, pressuring prices for nearly 3 years. That's it for the headlines. Now it's time for a check of weather. Cindy Clausen is filling in for Mike Hoffman in the studio this week. Cindy, the sun is out here in Indy, but I know that's not the case everywhere.
No, it certainly isn't, and we'll get to the maps in just a moment. Let's start you off with the latest U.S. drought monitor, and boy, have we seen some real improvement over the southern parts of the country, and especially out in the southwest, at least since the last time you saw me on this show. But we still have some dry pockets, especially in Florida and parts of the southeast, and we do have some dryness in parts of the north central United States as well. This is what it's looked like over the past 4 weeks, and you can see that we still had some more pockets in some of the nation's midsection. Certainly the southeast was a lot drier, but as we went through time, we did see some decent improvement across the area, especially in the southeastern United States. All right, here's a look then at how things are shaping up as we head through the week. And yeah, we're going to be seeing some wet weather in a fair amount of the eastern part of the U.S. It might be a little bit more spotty right in here, but we've got a low pressure system across that's going to be affecting the Gulf Coast states down in through Texas and even into the Four Corners region. We've got another low with a front extending through much of the east, and we have yet another front that's draped across the northern tier states. So look for some rain in a decent part of the country. By Wednesday, high pressure settles into much of the Corn Belt area and into the northern plains, so we'll see things drying out at least for a little bit. We'll see some rain in the lower Great Lakes, the eastern Great Lakes, into the northeast, and we're going to see some rain along the Gulf Coast states and into the southern plains, also into the Pacific Northwest. And as we get into Friday, we'll see another couple fronts affecting especially the nation's midsection, the southeast, and into the western Gulf Coast states, all the way into the northwestern United States. We'll have some more weather coming up a little bit later on in the show. Tyne?
All right, thanks, Cindy. Well, these race cars run on ethanol, and the winner, they will run on milk. So we'll talk both ethanol and dairy on the Marketing Roundtable. With me this week, Ted Seifert and Mike North. They join me from the racetrack next. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report on this race weekend. Here on the winner's podium, We have Mike North of Commodity Risk Management Group and Ted Seifert of Zaner Ag Hedge. We will have some ambient car noise in the background, so we will work around that this weekend. All right, Ted, to get us started off, I mean, we're going to focus on milk, we're going to focus on ethanol, since the winners drink milk and the cars are fueled by ethanol. But we cannot talk about the elephant in the room, if you can call this a room, the corn crop. And we look at all the rain, we look at all the replant. Farmers frustrated that this market has not responded favorably, or as favorably as some would like. Do you think that we have this potential to rally in the next 2 weeks based on all this moisture?
Well, you do have a good looking chart if we can hold on to the recent strength that we've had. But yeah, you know, let's look at Argentina this last year. We had a ton of flooding down in Argentina. The USDA started at a 57 million metric ton soybean crop. The trade brought that number down all the way down to 51, 52 million. And where did we end up? 57 million. So I think the moral of the story is, for whatever's not flooded out, the yield potential is still very much there. You're probably going to take a hit on your harvested acreage numbers, depending on whether we can get replant done or not. But I still think right now you have the potential, and we've gotten used to having this spring rally. I think producers are going to be disappointed when we don't have that. I do still think we'll have a rally at some point this year. It might just become later than what most people are expecting. It might happen after guys have already sold old crop cash.
Mike, when we look at this planting report, you know, and we see farmers are just a point behind in this corn crop, not much. But it does not take into consideration replant and replanting again and things like that, right? I mean, is that really going to start to show up in the conditions ratings?
That's where it would have to show up, but that's still a long ways off. Early, nobody gets too excited about any of that because, going back to Ted's statement, we have seen wet springs. We have seen moisture come at us before, and that's really kind of the key here. We've got moisture. And so it takes away a lot of that conversation that may be coming later. And let's not also forget that we have a big supply. And so if we want to talk about a rally, whether it's justified or not, you also have to have a motivated buyer. And right now the buyers are not motivated. You can see it in cash values, and you can see it as we come into these trades. We get up to about $3.95 D's corn, all the interest walks away.
Okay, but I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. When we look at all this moisture, we look at nutrient runoff, you would have to think that we are going to see a yield drag. I understand that's not priced in the market at this point, but one would think we're going to see this yield drag this year.
The other thing too is that, you know, USDA's expectation of a 171 national average yield, that would equal the second best yield we've ever seen. So we've got a very lofty expectation going in. I don't think you're seeing acreage expand. If anything, that's probably coming down. So yeah, I get that. I think the last USDA report we saw probably is going to show us our biggest balance sheet, our biggest carryover, because the production number I think has room to come down from there based on acreage. And again, that yield number I think is a lofty expectation. And I also wonder if the export number they've taken too much from one year to the next. It's a 350 million bushel drop. So I like the story for corn through the summer. I just don't know if we have to have this rally based on too wet conditions right now.
All right, so Mike, what do you think the likelihood is, and then we'll get off this corn talk, but what do you think the likelihood is that we could see a rally in this corn crop in the next couple weeks?
I think it's very possible, but it would be muted. I'm not looking for a large, explosive $4.50 to $5 type of a move. I'm not. Could we see 405, 420? Yeah, that's a possibility. Let's face it, we've got funds in a big short position. They're sitting here idle for the most part, and if we could motivate the money to move, we've got room for 20 or 30 cents.
But this week, as we did see some prices increase, do you think that we did see some farmers sell?
Yeah, I know we did. I know we had some producer selling happening with the strength that we saw on Friday and then again on Monday. It's going to happen. But as Mike was pointing out, we have a very large fund short position. At some point, we're going to clear them out. It's not very typical for them to keep that position this far into growing season. Usually they're flat by now or getting there. You think that that's going to happen. It's just, what's that spark? And I don't know if that spark happens in the next 2 weeks, but at some point during the growing season, I think we get that spark.
Real quick though, if we do see a little rally in the corn crop, does that come at the expense of soybeans?
It may, but the thing that we have to remember is that soybean export activity has remained at a pace that everybody's still pretty excited about. And so soybeans have been slow to give away any premium that they're carrying because there's still that hope that we can balance this big crop with big demand.
But there's going to be a lot of question about that after the big drop in the Brazilian real. The Brazilian producer has been more aggressively selling as well. So whether those exports stay like we thought, I mean, for a minute there, it looked like we were going to be competitive through August. Now it's a big question mark.
That is a very true point.
All right, well, we need to take a break on this race weekend, but when we come back, I promise, we are going to talk milk and ethanol this Memorial Day weekend, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Indianapolis 500 on race weekend. Again, we have some cars running behind us, so it may be a little loud in the show, but let's focus on ethanol and dairy. Ted, starting with you, do you think 2017, the rest of 2017, will get even more interesting for ethanol?
Absolutely. A lot of moving parts this year because with the big import tariffs that China's putting on DDGs and ethanol, we're going to see their imports likely drop, although that's going to be a big area of contention, we believe, with the Trump administration in trying to negotiate with China. The same time, we're a little bit worried about Brazil. Brazil had to import a fair amount of ethanol last year because they had a shorter sugarcane crop and they needed to offset some of their lost production. But they're moving and they want to raise their import tariffs, which right now are on hold until 2019, but there's a movement there to push that back up again. On the other side of that coin, though, you have what's happening here domestically. There's a big move towards E15. You've got Donnelly Grassley looking to try to extend the RVP, the rate pressure, to blends above and beyond E10. So E15 would become in that mix, and that is the huge hurdle we need to cross in order to really expand E15 usage domestically.
But Ted, we've seen this push to E15 before. So what changes this year? You know, what makes maybe this year the year that we can get something passed?
Well, if we can get it passed and we can get the blender credits, you're going to see that happen. It's going to move in to retail outlets a lot sooner. Your blenders are going to want to use that. So that has the possibility. Plus, you really get the feeling that, you know, just the talk that we've had about E15 lately, it seems a lot more positive, both in the media and also politically. It seems the consumer's becoming more aware. I think there's something there. And then one other thing, India has about doubled their exports year over year, so that might help to offset some of the exports.
Speaking of exports, Mike, how are we setting on dairy exports so far this year and looking at the world market?
We've had a really good run on exports, and mostly in the protein categories and in the powder categories. And that's been really helpful for us. However, we're starting to run into a place where we're seeing a lot more competition globally, and we're just not getting the competitive edge like we had. Now, the weakening of our dollar, that is a big thing, and in the last month and a half, that's again started to open some doors for us that may bring us back into that circle where we start to pick up some more business.
So we need to see some more weakness in the U.S. dollar.
That would be very helpful. We've got the dollar trading in that 96 territory now. If we could take that down even another 300 or 400 basis points, that would be very helpful.
Well, Mike, in this latest milk production report, we see milk production is continuing to increase. I mean, what's the likelihood that we see this supply situation slow down?
Well, we've always had this model in the United States where in really good times we add cows, we grow the herd, we bring on more milk production, and in bad times we go for the gross revenue score, right? We continue to add cows, we continue to push milk, and I don't see us backing off of that. This last report had us over 2%. We've been showing some 3% growth in previous months. This is a situation that's not going away anytime quick. We added 7,000 cows. Guys don't do that and then back away from the table.
So you're not very favorable on milk prices here in the next quarter?
I'm hopeful that this loss in dollar value opens up some export activity for us, but we don't have the domestic growth to just continue to soak up all this additional milk. So if we don't get the exports, that's where things are going to be softer. But the reality for us is Germany and France have been a little bit lower in their milk production this spring. Conditions haven't been quite as favorable as they had hoped. But butter demand around the world, fat demand just in its entirety has been very strong. And so there's some budding optimism there, but we still have the risk of this massive domestic supply that we have to work through, and that is what we carry forward through the summer and the risk that we'll face, and what will ultimately offset those export hopes.
So as a dairy producer, real quick, what can you do with current milk prices?
Well, we've got a $17.20 average in the second half of the year. It's real simple to go out there and start attending to that, whether it be with future strategies, option strategies, working with your plant. But I would suggest to producers that they remain nimble. $17 represents the upper end of the average over the last 10 years. Attend to it, but give yourself some topside mobility too if something should change and shift all of these fundamentals.
All right, thank you both. We appreciate it. We need to take a quick break this Memorial Day weekend, but when we come back, we're going to get both of their closing thoughts here on U.S. Farm Report. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Closing thoughts from the racetrack. Ted, start with you.
Well, I'm going to say I'm friendly for corn prices or the possibilities that we have for this growing season. While we haven't gotten that big too wet rally like a lot of us have had hoped for, I do think we'll see something here during the growing season. Again, we've got funds really very short. At some point, we'll get them to cover those short positions. And you look at the balance sheet that we saw in the March or in the May USDA WASDE report, you think that maybe that production number is about as big as it's going to get, and you think that maybe the demand number is about as low as it's going to get. So when you put the two of them together, I think there's optimism there for the corn market. Soybeans might be a different story, as that production number might actually be growing.
Okay. Mike?
And I think when you look at the charts on the grain side of things, whether you're talking corn, wheat, soybeans, they've been sleepy. Go back to last September, and wheat and corn specifically have been caught in a range that's been incredibly tight. Soybeans have, struggled with that 980 threshold of late. Perhaps as we see a little bit of optimism that perhaps the balance sheet is going to shrink, that opens up some doors for some rallies. But in the short term, look for them to be a little bit more muted, be ready to capture them, and just prepare for a normal growing season. Sell when you have opportunities and defend against the risk of lower prices.
All right, thank you both for being here this weekend and making the trip down. As we mentioned last year, drink a glass of milk for Mike this weekend. Maybe fill up your car with ethanol this Memorial Day weekend as you're traveling to see family, and we can help demand one person at a time, right?
There you go.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. Please stay with us because John Phipps joins us from his farm next. Welcome back. Well, we've heard story after story about farmers having to replant not only once this year, but sometimes twice. It's a nightmare for those in it and not an easy decision to make. Here's John Phipps.
There are a few more dreaded aspects of row crop farming than having to replant. To begin with, you have to admit failure, which is not exactly our favorite activity. It also doesn't help if your adjacent neighbor planted on a slightly different date, maybe even a day difference, and his field looks great by comparison. Another problem is with those old windshield survey from the pickup truck. For the last few weeks, the common farmer crosstalk around here was all about how the corn was still coming up. While we almost convinced ourselves after 4 weeks, what mostly is happening is a trick of perspective. The plants that have emerged are just getting tall enough to make the row, viewed from the road at a small angle, appear to be pretty solid-ish. This leads to what I think is the worst part, deciding how much of a field can be saved, if any. Invariably, we get a few bags to fill in the wet spots, only to discover out in the field a much vaster area of pitiful stands. Okay, do you now rip up the whole field and start over? Depending on the replant seed pricing, this may be the most attractive choice, except when the calendar's running out. 2, while a fresh start looks appealing at the time, there will always be a few survivors from that first planting to remind you all season that it's a do-over. Option 2, you can spot in the bad areas, but this triggers yet another decision. Do you go in and till them out first, creating patchwork fields, or drive the field, dropping and lifting the planter, ending up with areas of under and overpopulated rows side by side? It is also emotionally exhausting. The decisions you make during the first hour of replanting are different from the ones you make hours later. To all of you replanting, or heaven forbid re-replanting, I share your pain. Many of you are far worse off than we are. I have never found any rationalization, however, that can make this experience anything but unpleasant. And if you take some meager, quiet comfort that others around you are in the same or worse circumstances, that doesn't make you a bad person.
Thanks, John. Well, it's weeks of celebration leading up to race day, but on race day, it's more than just the fastest driver who will enter winner's circle right below me. It's also the glass of milk. We'll meet the man behind the milk, or the Indy 500 milkman, coming up on this special edition of U.S. Farm Report.
From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Well, we're back for more from the Indianapolis 500 Speedway on U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Here's what we have over the next 30 minutes. Meet the 2017 Indy 500 Milkman, and it's a commemorative occasion with more than just a glass for this family. For Pagel's Ponderosa Dairy, employees are treated like family. Meet the real faces of dairy. And John gets back to the basics with Medicaid. Now for the headlines. The Trump administration out with the proposed budget, and many ag groups are not happy with the cuts. The administration's budget calling for a 21% cut to USDA's funding, with American Farm Bureau going as far as saying the budget proposal fails America's farmers and ranchers. Now, breaking it down, the president's proposal includes slashing crop insurance by 36%, or $29 billion savings over 10 years. $1.7 billion in savings would come from the Food for Peace program, which ships U.S.-grown food to help hunger overseas. But it also eats into nutrition, with the administration proposing a 25% cut to SNAP, or $193 billion over 10 years. Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue in the hot seat in front of the House Appropriations Committee this week, hearing strong opposition from lawmakers about the budget proposal.
You can't squeeze blood from a turnip, and the budget that was submitted yesterday attempts to do just that.
My hope is that this budget document is dead on arrival, because I believe it cruel, I believe it heartless, and I believe it inhumane.
Perdue taking the heat, saying the administration has the responsibility to right-size the budget, but ultimately USDA will get the job done, even if the agency is forced to do more with less.
USDA will take what you appropriators believe is in the best interest of fulfilling the responsibilities, and I commit to you all, each and every one of you, that I'm going to make it go as far and as beneficial to American citizens as possible.
The secretary also asked about the steep cuts to crop insurance, but says he knows the farm programs are extremely important.
My goal, my principle, I guess, as USDA Secretary, as we help to advise and consult as you all deal with the Farm Bill, is devise programs that let the market determine what people plant. They shouldn't be planning for programs.
Also in Washington this week, testimonies over the health of the ag economy. Chairman Pat Roberts acknowledging farmers facing a different financial picture than during the previous Farm Bill discussions, with net farm income cut in half. During testimony in front of the Senate Ag Committee, USDA's chief economist Robert Johansson says farm budgets expected to tighten this year on the expectation of flat commodity prices and more normal yields.
Demand for Farm Service Agency loans this year has seen only a small 6% decline from last year's $6.3 billion record level, with an increase in delinquencies of only about 1% in the last 12 months.
Financial stress in the farm sector has increased more significantly in regions where cropland is generally less productive, and in regions concentrated in markets that have been particularly weak, such as cattle and wheat, for example.
Economists say the net effect of the situation is difficult to forecast, but further consolidation within certain farm sectors is expected. The U.S. organic sector continuing to see impressive growth. The Organic Trade Association says organic sales in the U.S. racked up $47 billion last year. That's $3.7 billion better than the previous. The group says today organic makes up 5% of total food sales in the U.S. All right, that's it for the news. And now let's pitch it back to the studio where Cindy Clausen will have a longer range look of weather.
Thanks, Tyne. Well, we do have a trough in the north central United States. That's going to travel across the northeastern United States. So look for some stormy weather, at least the beginning to the middle part of the work week, while we have some really warm weather expected in the west. That trough continues to push on off to the east, and we'll see that ridge bringing some warmer air then, especially into the western Great Lakes all the way down to the Gulf Coast, while another trough starts to enter the northwest. But the air won't be that much colder with that trough. All right, 30-day outlook. We're looking at cooler than normal temperatures in much of the nation's midsection, while we expect those warmer temperatures to hang out, well, basically along the coastlines, East Coast, Gulf Coast, even along the West Coast as well. As far as precipitation, looks like it's going to be a wet one as far as most of the eastern part of the country, where we're going to see those drier pockets are in the especially the southwest and along the west coast. That's a look at your national forecast. Now back to you, Tyne.
Thanks, Cindy. Well, last year, more than 5 million people tuned in to watch the Indianapolis 500, with more than 300,000 expected to fill these stands. But one Indiana dairyman won't just attend. He'll also play a key role in the show. Betsy Gibbon tells us why this is a special connection for a dairy producer and his family.
It happened, so it was like, well, okay, so it was like...
Joe Kelsey, a dairyman from Indiana, has done it all. He manages his farm of 500 cows and hundreds of acres right outside of Indianapolis.
We are a 6th generation dairy farm. We were land granted in 1837 by President Martin Van Buren, and so for generations we've been a part of stewarding this land, taking care of the animals.
A responsibility he's carried from the farm to the State House.
In 2009, I was appointed to be the director of the Department of Agriculture here in Indiana, talking about agriculture, promoting what we do every day.
And now he's taking on a big job not far from his backyard.
Checkered flag is in the air.
The responsibility of representing dairy producers like him across the country at the 101st running of the Indianapolis 500.
There is nothing like Indianapolis in the month of May, and the excitement that exists in and around the track is an experience to behold. This is something that I think is so extravagant that it's hard to put into words, but extremely excited about being there and being a part of the Indianapolis 500 this year.
Kelsey's job is to award the winner, chief mechanic, and team owner with the bottles of milk, a tradition that's been around since 1933, when winner Louis Meyer asked for a glass of buttermilk in Victory Lane.
When you can connect and marry the traditions that happen in auto racing at the Indianapolis 500 to the traditions that happen in your own family, it is quite a special feeling.
And you could say Kelsey has some pretty big shoes to fill this year. His dad, Merrill, was the 2007 Indianapolis 500 milkman. Merrill Kelsey awarded the 2007 winner, Dario Franchitti, the coveted bottle of milk, in front of millions on TV and on the track.
To be able to kind of step in and fill those shoes behind him, a really special event for me and my family to kind of remember him as he's passed just last year, and kind of have those special memories of the things we can share in common, and it's a special set of memories for sure.
Joe says his father Merrill did not exactly give him advice for the race, but he did leave behind an adage to live by.
He was one of those guys that always kind of had a special way about him when he would give you advice, but it was more of make the most of every situation that you find yourself in.
A way to hold family memories close and share his everyday passion on race day.
I'm really blessed to be a part of the industry and the community that is agriculture, and I'm excited to share it.
Reporting in Whiteland, Indiana, I'm Betsy Gibbon.
Thanks, Betsy. Well, the chief mechanic, team owner, and winner get to choose which type of milk to quench their thirst. The options are whole milk, 2%, or skim milk. But officials say it's 2% and whole milk really getting even more popular each year. Well, up next, John Phipps.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Kubota. See the all-new Commander Pro Zero-Turn Mower at Kubota.com.
Welcome back. Well, as John promised last week, he's kicking off a multi-week ag explainer about Medicaid. And this weekend, it's all about the basics.
Your call is very important to us. Please hold.
Last week I talked about my local nursing home and how important Medicaid is to its existence. In order to help rural Americans understand how Medicaid and possible changes to it could affect them, this is part one of an ag explainer on Medicaid. This week we'll focus on the big picture. Medicaid is one of the big four expenses for the federal government, either 3 or 4, depending on how you slice the categories. It works by empowering states to run their own programs after meeting minimum standards. For every dollar a state spends on Medicaid enrollees, the U.S. government reimburses a minimum of $1. But for poorer states, it could and it is higher. In the end, the federal government pays 63% of all Medicaid expenses. This money is spent providing health care to children, low-income adults, the disabled, and elderly. One important note is the cost sharing is reimbursed to the states, not to recipients or providers. I was surprised that even some of the providers I talked to thought that the money came mostly from the state because they never see a federal check. There is a divergence between the number of people helped and how much is spent. Some recipients have higher needs, most notably the disabled and the elderly. So, while the elderly number only 8% of the enrollment, they receive 14% of the expenditures. This is even more pronounced for the disabled. Now, long-term care, like our nursing home, totaled $118 billion last fiscal year. This is the total for both states and federal. Of that, 37%, or $44 billion, went to nursing homes. The largest portion of long-term expense is for home health services, and the balance is for mental health facilities. To sum up, Medicaid is the largest health insurer in the United States with 97 million recipients, almost 3 in 10 Americans. 90% of the $553 billion Medicaid dollars went to children, the elderly, the disabled, or households with at least one working member. With this background in the basics, next week we'll detail how Medicaid works and what its future could look like, especially in rural America.
All right, thanks, John. And he'll continue this series, but if you have questions or comments, you can email John or send him a note on Facebook or Twitter. Well, stay with us. We have much more to come, including our focus on dairy. We'll meet a real Faces of Dairy next on the show.
U.S. Farm Report, brought to you by Balchem. Standing beside you for 50 years, bringing real results to the dairy industry. Now, through the Real Faces of Dairy project, you can share your story at realfacesofdairy.com.
Well, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the number of fatalities among ag workers are on the rise. Roughly 180 deaths happened on the farm, with ag workers in 2015, a 22% jump from 148 workers in 2014. Pagels Ponderosa Dairy in Kewanee, Wisconsin is doing what it can to reduce that statistic as they care and treat employees like their own family. In this month's Real Faces of Dairy report, here's Betsy Gibbon.
Pagels Ponderosa Dairy in Kewanee, Wisconsin is bustling day in and day out. The family-owned dairy has expanded significantly since it was first established in 1946.
When I took over the farm from my parents, we had 65 cows and 320 acres, and now we have we're cropping a little over 8,500 acres, and we're milking just over 5,000 cows here at this operation.
And more cows comes the need for more people.
We learned that we were going to have to do something different than just pay a good wage.
John's daughter Jamie manages the office and heads up the Human Resources Department.
It is a lot easier to manage the 5,000 milking cows than it is to manage the employees that we have.
Today, the dairy operation requires several hundred people to keep things running smoothly.
Once the employees are here 1 year and beyond, they usually stay. So we have a lot of long-term employees, but the newest employees that join the team are by far the hardest to keep.
Which is why they now offer new hire items, care packages, and training.
We're into long-term employment. We're not into the people that want to come and go and look for another job. So we try to take care of our people so that they can be the most productive for us as we want them to be.
The family took notes from others and developed its own employee program, abbreviated CARS. The concept? Communication, accountability, respect, and sustainability.
It's a program to educate the new employees on who we are, what we're about, what the family's about, why you want to work at Pagels Ponderosa, what benefits we offer. So we've been trying to do a better job to let the employees know why they should work here.
Because I've got 8 managers I meet with every morning, and I give them the tools that they need to do their job. And as long as I can do that, and I keep them going, that keeps them as high productive as I can make them.
It lays out expectations, but also helps the dairy understand employees' needs as well, getting the person in the right position to succeed for the safety of themselves and the animals.
They learn what's expected of them as an employee, and what they get a full job description, and so that they understand what to do.
Communication goes both ways. The Pagels audit and follow up with documentation, If it's not written down, it's as if the training didn't happen. Beyond the business, they also check in to make sure employees are enjoying their job.
We talk about culture and ethics and the right way to treat people. It's not just about the job itself, it's about how you treat people and how you want to be treated.
I love our employees. Our employees are just like family. I know our employees, I know their spouses, their kids are like my kids.
The family hopes the ever-moving dairy will continue its growth, but knows the success of the operation is not just built in the barn, but with employees, the family, who do the work and make it all possible. Reporting for U.S. Farm Report, I'm Betsy Gibbon.
Thanks, Betsy. And they tell us as part of the employee program, they focus on employee care as well as training. That's why the Pagels ensure employees are trained on which chemicals they're working with and where safety sheets are located. When we come back, Machinery Pete has this week's Tractor Tales.
Time now for Tractor Tales with Machinery Pete, the most trusted name in farm equipment.
Welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we're going green with a 1969 John Deere 4020. Retired from farming, this John Deere spent its days showing off at shows and parades. And even though this classic had all the bells and whistles of its time, owner Gail Goodell made a few improvements of his own.
I bought it used, partially reconditioned, and I've done more with it since. Had it repainted. Primarily, I have one that I started farming with. I bought it new. It's not this one, but it's one similar to it. And I've still a favorite tractor. Anybody has to like a 4020. And I take it on tractor drives. You'll see I've got a canopy on top. It's just a synchro range. It's not a special 4020. There's many of them out there, but I like it. It's not going to do any heavy work any longer. When we go on tractor drives, we need to have mirrors. Most tractor drives require a mirror, so that's up there where I can easily see what's behind me. I got a little addition here where I put a Garmin on there, and that it's interesting. When you're a long ways from home, you can pick things out for things that you don't just readily pick out. A park, or you see a lot of things, or seeing roads coming up that you don't know where it's at, what it is, and so I use it for that, and I use it in tractor drives. We keep track of miles and miles per hour and the length of time we're driving. I've only owned this tractor about 3 years now. I wanted to get my own original 4020 that I bought new fixed up, and I just couldn't seem to find the time to do it, or didn't want to give it up from the day-to-day use. Long term, I think I will get my original one rebuilt and hopefully looking fairly nice, and maybe replace this one. I like 4020s, and 4020s are good property. Will be for a long, long time.
Thanks so much. Well, keeping with the race day theme, our Country Church salute goes to 2 churches this weekend located right here in Indiana. The Bell Fountain United Methodist Church and the Fairview United Methodist Church are located in Jay County, Indiana. Bell Fountain was founded in 1841 and Fairview in 1853. Both became part of the United Methodist system in 1968. Pastor Gordon Jackson serves both of these churches. Pastor Gordon, thank you so much for sending that church salute in. And remember, if you have a church that you would like to submit, salutes can be sent to the address on the screen. Well, our marketing analyst rejoined me. We have some From the Farm photos right here from Winter Circle next. Welcome back. To finish the show, we're here in Winter Circle, actually standing on the podium where the winning driver will stand. I feel so honored and privileged at this point. Do both of you?
I've never podiumed at the Indy 500 before.
You haven't? Have you ever even watched the Indy 500 in person before?
I sat in the seats over there before. You bet.
All right. Well, we have some farmer photos to share. And while the sun is trying to pop out here at the Indy racetrack, it has been a ruthless start to planting for many of our viewers this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Our buddy Matt Bennett, another analyst on the show, says he's planting his field for the 3rd time. The rain has been ruthless down where he is in central Illinois.
Yeah, actually, I talked to Matt this week. 15 inches of rain is what he's received just in the month of May. Just crazy. Mike, do you have one from Ohio?
You bet. And in Ohio, they were busy planting beans last week. Trent, who is 4, is helping his dad, Chad, and his uncle Brian load seed beans into the planter. Corn is in the ground. as well as some beans, but got another 1.5 inches of rain over the weekend.
And Ralph and Brian Elfke were busy planting soybeans in Hamburg, Minnesota. Their corn crop is already in the ground, but they said they do have some parts that are flooding. They still need to finish their soybean crop, but they told us there are some areas drowned out in some of their fields. But with all this rain, at least they'll have a corn crop in Louisiana this year, guys. Thomas says the crop looks good so far, but July will really tell the story for them. He says this corn should come off the last week of July. It's just being in the Midwest, you know, it's just crazy to think that they actually harvest in July. Again, thank you for making the trip down. We appreciate it this weekend. For all of us at U.S. Farm Report, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to join us again next week as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend and a safe Memorial Day holiday, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report, America's longest-lasting news program for farmers, is powered by Ram Trucks, America's longest-lasting pickups. U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.